Tonight, the historic comeback. USA! Former President Trump elected to the White House again after winning key battleground states and taking down the blue wall.
Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time.
Vice President Kamala Harris conceding in front of a crowd of supporters, ending her unprecedented 107-day campaign.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
Across the country, scenes of celebration.
Ecstatic. I'm ecstatic. I want to just rip this spike up and throw it in the air and celebrate it.
And also those of heartbreak.
I'm disgusted by this country, to be honest.
Trump's victory marking the end to an election like no other. He was federally indicted and criminally convicted while campaigning and survived 2 assassination attempts on his life.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight.
Then, the incumbent president stepping down as the nominee.
It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president.
The state of democracy, the economy, and immigration at the top of mind for voters.
We want better gas prices. We want better grocery prices.
So where did the Harris campaign come up short? And which demographics swayed this race for Trump?
Decision 2024. This is a special edition of Top Story. Here is Tom Llamas.
And good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our nation's political landscape shifting dramatically once again as former President Trump becomes the president-elect, soon to be the 47th commander-in-chief, defying the odds in a stunning comeback. The former president defeating Vice President Harris, reclaiming the office he lost just 4 years ago. Let's walk you through where the Electoral College count stands right now, with some of those battleground states still outstanding. We know them to be Nevada and Arizona tonight. We're still waiting on the vote there. Former President Trump also leading in the popular vote. You can see the numbers right here just behind me. 4 million votes cast, more than 4 million votes cast, I should say. If he wins the popular vote, Trump will be the first Republican candidate to do so in 2 decades. Vice President Harris delivering a powerful and emotional concession speech this afternoon at Howard University, her alma mater.
A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny.
Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, tearing up, standing alongside Harris's husband and their family. The vice president also confirming she called President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. So how did Trump clinch such a decisive victory? It all came down to those key 7 battlegrounds. The former president shocking Democrats by shattering the blue wall states, sweeping all 3. We called Michigan for Trump this afternoon, that state reporting its highest turnout ever. You see it right here with all those votes cast. It looks to be more than 6 million, nearly 7 million votes there. The former president flipping Pennsylvania, the biggest prize of them all, with 19 electoral votes, and Trump winning back Wisconsin, another swing state he won in 2016. The former president also winning Georgia's 16 electoral votes after President Biden dramatically flipped the Peach State in 2020. Former President Trump elated in the early morning hours as he declared victory.
We're going to make our country better than it ever has been. And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
So what key demographic groups fueled Trump's surge back to the White House? One of our NBC News exit polls shows Latino voters significantly helped put him over the top here. You can see how that changed with Latino voters from 2020 to 2024. The former president bet on young male voters, paid off big time at the polls. You can see he made significant inroads when compared to years past. And even more surprising, Trump grew his support across nearly all demographics, including those that historically support Democrats. You see right here above 27%. He grew his results there, 27%, 3% with black voters, 12% with Asian American voters, even with young voters. You see it right there, 18 to 29, a 13% increase. Trump's win driving strong market reaction. The market's closing at record highs, the Dow soaring to 3.57%. The big question tonight, what will his second term look like, and who will he place in his administration? Will tech billionaire and staunch Trump supporter Elon Musk play a significant role? And what about RFK Jr., who ended his own campaign and threw his weight behind Trump? He spoke exclusively with our Vaughn Hilliard earlier today.
Would you like to be nominated to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services?
Like I said, I don't know if that's the post that I want. I may be more effective in the White House as a health czar or something like that.
And what happens to Trump's criminal cases as he steps into the Oval Office? Officials with the Justice Department telling NBC News Special Counsel Jack Smith is figuring out how to wind down 2 federal criminal cases against him. The former president also scheduled to be sentenced in his New York hush money case in just 3 weeks. We're going to have much more of this throughout our show. Trump will be forced to face 2 wars overseas, one in the Middle East and the other in Ukraine. We'll take a closer look at the international reaction and how his presidency could dramatically shake up the already volatile situation. Richard Engel is in the House tonight. And let's take a check of the balance of power right now in the Senate. Republicans taking control right now. They have 52 Senate seats. This is what we're projecting right now. There are still races that have yet to be called. And we want to take a look also at the Senate pickups of what's happened so far, picking up Senate seats in Ohio, West Virginia, and Montana right now. And again, there's still some races we're waiting on. But right now, control of the House is still in play. Here's a look at where the situation stands right now. Still 41 uncalled races. We're going to dig a little deeper into this with Ryan Nobles later in the show. For more on Trump's decisive victory, I want to get right over to Garrett Haake, who's at the Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida tonight. Garrett, you've been with the Trump team today. What are their next moves, and how are they preparing for this transition?
Well, Tom, we know that Donald Trump is eager to get back out on the road at some point in the not-too-distant future. We expect him to have at least one thank you rally with his supporters in the coming weeks, according to a Trump aide. And, of course, he is expected to visit the White House at the invitation of President Biden. I think a key moment for a lot of people, perhaps still shell-shocked by the results of last night. But the transition effort is well underway. It has been run by 2 co-chairs. Donald Trump is a very superstitious politician. He has not really gotten his hands dirty in that effort yet. He essentially didn't want to jinx himself before he was actually reelected. Now I think we'll see him start making decisions, some sources say at a pretty rapid clip, about who he wants to see in his cabinet, who he'd like to see surround him in the White House, and they can start filling out all the hundreds and thousands of jobs in the federal bureaucracy for which it'll be his administration's responsibility to hire.
And Garrett, President-elect Trump entered the White House in 2017. It started shaking things up pretty quickly. I can remember Executive Order 13769, also known as the Muslim travel ban. I think we have some video of that affected predominantly Muslim countries, the crowds and the lines at airports. It created a lot of uncertainty. That was less than a month into his presidency. Do we know what he plans on tackling first?
Well, based on what he said on the campaign trail, I think we can probably expect to see executive orders on energy production. That's something that he's talked about doing on as early as day one. Also on some kind of executive order on trying to seal the border, essentially reversing some of the moves that President Biden took early in his term to reopen immigration pathways and reopen the asylum seeking process, something that Trump had closed down, frankly, with the help of COVID near the end of his term. But, Tom, even before that, we could see Trump's impact on the world stage. He has repeatedly said on the campaign trail that he would be working towards an end to the war between Ukraine and Russia even before he takes the Oval Office. Obviously, there are enormous legal repercussions to that, foreign policy repercussions to a not sitting president negotiating as a president on the world stage. But Trump, has talked quite candidly about his concerns about World War III should that war go on. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. We already have President Zelensky on Trump's call list, according to the Ukrainian president, to find out that he's spoken to Vladimir Putin in the not-too-distant future, perhaps even about that conflict. Tom?
Garrett Haake, who's been nonstop for us. Garrett, we appreciate that. For more on President-elect Trump's win, I want to bring in Harrison Fields, a surrogate for the Trump 2024 campaign and a communications assistant director for the Heritage Foundation. Harrison, millions of Americans woke up this morning wondering what a second Trump presidency means for them. With all the promises the president-elect made on the campaign trail, what are the priorities, do you think, of the president-elect right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And truly a historic victory for President Trump, the most resilient man in American politics. Resounding victory both in the popular vote and the Electoral College. The American people have spoken. They want Donald Trump as the 47th president of the United States. But to get to your overall question, I think the priorities are very, very high. You talk about the border, you talk about the economy, and you mentioned it earlier with the wars that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have allowed to go on across the world stage. He wants to obviously end those wars, bring peace abroad and bring peace at home. So the list of things he has to do is very, very large. You talked about energy as well. President Trump is going to be ready to work on day one. This man does not sleep. He's a go, go, go. He's a fighter for this country, and he'll be ready on day one to do the job.
Speaking of day one has almost started, right? We're day one after the election. What has he been up to in Mar-a-Lago? We know he was fielding calls from President Biden and from Vice President Harris.
Well, those are public calls. I can't get ahead of anything. You know, I'll leave that to the campaign spokespeople directly to talk about that more. But the president is always working. Obviously, his team and him were talking about what this looks like. I mean, we're less than 24 hours out since the race was called. So I know the agenda is very long, and the American people can be rest assured that his focus is on what he's going to do on day one, and he and his team will be fully prepared come January 20th.
Do you think he's going to start taking meetings with world leaders before the inauguration?
I don't want to get ahead of the president. That would be irresponsible for me to do. He has longstanding relationships with these leaders. We cannot forget he served as the 45th president of the United States. So whatever meetings or conversation he has, I'll let those readouts come out. But he has these relationships with Putin, with Xi, with Zelensky, with Macron, with Trudeau. So whatever conversations are had, I'll let the team read out. But he has those relationships already, and he'll be eager to talk to them and be eager to get back to work and restore peace and trade deals and relationships, because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have failed America on the world stage.
The president-elect in his past, he's even said it, he's not afraid to settle scores. Who do you think he's coming after first?
Well, I mean, the question, I think, is a little bit hostile in that you have to remember you had the Biden-Harris administration going after Donald Trump left and right when it comes to the lawfare after him. So when you talk about retribution, it was actually Kamala Harris and Joe Biden that engaged a retribution campaign against their leading political opponent, which is one of the reasons why he won in such a decisive way. The American people didn't like the weaponization of the federal government against a political opponent. His retribution is going to be the success of this country. He's not in it for the get-backs. He is making sure the American people can get back to work, can have more money in their bank accounts, can feel safe again, have a secure border, and restore peace abroad.
Harrison Fields, we thank you for joining Top Story tonight.
Thank you for having me.
President-elect Donald Trump won the White House, but at this moment, as you just heard there, he is still facing a long list of legal battles. There's the D.C. election interference case, the Florida classified documents case, the New York hush money case in which Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts with sentencing scheduled for November 26th, and finally, the Georgia election interference case, which is on hold over District Attorney Fani Willis's involvement with that case. But tonight, two sources tell NBC News the Department of Justice and Special Counsel Jack Smith are winding down the two federal cases against Trump to comply with longstanding department policy that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. To help us understand what it all means, NBC News legal analyst Danny Sabalos joins us now. So, Danny, let me understand this right. If he would have lost, they would have kept moving forward. But since he won, they're not going to drop the case?
Well, wait a minute. I'm not so sure the word drop is implicit in that language. Winding down, in their mind, for DOJ may mean that they're thinking they will just put it on pause, which would be sort of consistent, and I'm a defense attorney, so take this with a grain of salt, with sort of the single-minded prosecution view of just onward, onward, onward. In other words, they may be thinking, hey, we'll just pause this as we're supposed to do while he's president, when the reality is, Tom, the two federal cases are gone. Bye-bye. They no longer exist. It's like that Schrodinger's cat. If you open the box or not, I don't know. No matter what, the cases are gone, whether they're dead today or dead as soon as Trump gets in office.
Explain that to me.
The federal cases are gone.
Why? Does he have the power to just go there and say, hey, I want them gone?
He is going to be the head of the DOJ. He's going to be the chief executive.
He can order the attorney general to drop the case.
He can do it, exactly. So he can do it a number of different ways. But probably the cleanest would be to appoint an attorney general, a independently minded attorney general who will just happen to get in on the first day and dismiss all of these federal cases. He can't do anything about the state cases, but the federal cases are gone, no matter what DOJ is winding down. And I really don't know what that means. Maybe they mean they're going to self-dismiss, or they just think they're going to pause it during the pendency of the president, which is not only Pollyannish, it's sort of almost delusional, because those cases are going away, no matter what.
Yeah, and
DOJ
also you don't want to
today.
waste taxpayer dollars if they're going to eventually go away. I want to ask you about the sentencing. What's going to happen with that here in Manhattan?
That is probably one of the more curious legal questions. It's a state court case. Trump can do nothing to pardon himself or get rid of that case. There are two significant dates coming up this month. Number one, Justice Merchan, the state court judge assigned to the case, is going to decide a motion to possibly dismiss. Now, you'll recall, even though these hush money payments from 1,000 feet look like they had nothing to do with presidential activity, some of the evidence that came in was from people who worked in the White House with Donald Trump. So, under the Supreme Court's intervening decision on immunity, that evidence may have come in improperly. So that's one example of why this entire New York case may now be dismissed. Even though the jury returned a verdict finding him guilty, the Supreme Court then came out with their decision. So now Justice Merchan has to decide whether or not this case could still be dismissed. If it's not, then the next question is, will he be sentenced later in the month? Now, probably as defense counsel, this is what I would do. I would ask for an adjournment of that, and the prosecution may even agree to it. We don't know right now. But I would look to adjourn that case, and then, while he is president, possibly it goes away any number of other ways. The reality is, even if he were sentenced this month...
Yeah, if you're sentenced to prison.
Yeah, but he's not going to go to prison. Now, reasonable minds can disagree with me on this.
Right.
But the odds are of him getting a sentence of incarceration on the lowest level felonies in New York, nonviolent, no guns, no drugs, 70-plus-year-old defendant, he's not going to get a prison sentence. I could be wrong, but this is a bet I'm willing to make. The reality is, again, it may be a purely philosophical discussion, because if the sentencing is adjourned, it may be adjourned to oblivion.
Yeah, I want one final question, and this one would put you on the spot. Any ideas on who he would appoint to be Attorney General?
Oh, my gosh, that was not, I did not get a preview of that one.
But you're Danny Savalos, you're Danny C.
This is such a political question. I really don't know, but I can tell you the qualifications. Yeah. The qualifications will be
I'm wondering some of the attorneys that he went to war with in all these court cases. There were lawyers that were always by his side that he got to know very well.
He's got a huge team of lawyers. I mean, if you're talking about the lawyers that he went to war with in court, you know, you have Todd Blanche,
right,
who he's been with on not just the case here in New York, a number of his other cases. So you're right. He's had access to a lot of different lawyers. And now that the Republicans control the Senate, when it comes to confirmation, he's got a lot of options. But make no mistake about it. Politician or practicing lawyer, the one qualification is going to be, whether that's in writing or not, that on day one, the two federal cases against him, no matter what their procedural posture is, they are going goodbye.
Yeah. Danny Savalos, always great to have you, even when I put you on the spot. I appreciate that. Vice President Harris tried to comfort a crowd of tearful supporters just a short while ago as she conceded the election to President-elect Trump at her alma mater, Howard University. Let's go to NBC's Yamiche Alcindor, who was there in Washington today. Yamiche, Vice President Harris conceded but said she was not giving up on what her campaign was fighting for. She had a message for the young supporters there. I want to play just a bit of that, and we'll come out and talk to you about it.
To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win.
Okay, Yamiche, you've seen a lot of Harris speeches over the years. How was this one different?
Well, this speech was certainly more solemn than I've ever seen the vice president be. She looked sad, and that was really mirroring the emotion of this crowd that gathered at Howard University, just a few blocks from where I'm standing. People were crying. People were shouting at her, saying, "I love you." But you could tell that this was really a deflated crowd and that people were really heartbroken. But in this speech, she also was trying to channel that emotion and giving people a sense of purpose and mission, because she said, look, your heart might be broken, but the fight continues, even if it takes a while, as you just played. And she also said that this fight continues in a number of places, including the courts, the public square, as well as the ballot box. And she also said the fight can also continue in quiet ways, which is just being kind to fellow Americans. So she was definitely trying to honor what is really heartbreak with so many Democrats today. But she was also trying to tell them, you're young people, especially a lot of the people in the crowd were college students, teenagers even, that maybe voted for the first time. She was saying you still have power and you should be able to use that, Tom.
And then, Yamiche, I do want to ask you, I know you have reporting about that phone call between Harris and Trump. Do you have any news that you can share with us?
Yeah, so the two talked this afternoon. The vice president called President-elect Trump to congratulate him and to also say that she was going to be part of a peaceful transfer of power. So she was really trying to make sure that she was being clear that she was ready to help the incoming Trump administration in any way she could. And it was interesting when she was talking about that call in front of this crowd at Howard University. At first she said, I talked to President-elect Trump, and the crowd started booing. But she went on and said, and I told him that we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power because we're going to honor the votes of the American people. We're going to honor what Americans do, which is peacefully transfer power no matter what the parties are. And the crowd actually applauded for that. So she was really, I think, leaning in on this idea that even if your heart is broken, you got to make sure that you're honoring the votes of these millions and millions of Americans who, of course, have now reelected Donald Trump.
Okay. Yamiche, we thank you for all your reporting. I want to bring in MSNBC host and former advisor to Vice President Harris, Symone Sanders-Townsend, who joins us tonight. Symone, I know you've been talking about Vice President Harris since yesterday and today. I wanted to have you on because I think you keep it real and you were very blunt in your assessment. So my first question to you is a tough one. Is this the end of Vice President Harris's political career?
No, I don't think it's the end of her political career. There are many avenues, right? Like she could be an ambassador. She could be a governor. She could run for president again, right? Like, I personally don't think that we are looking at a 2028 run, but that's a long ways away from now. But I don't think it's the end of her career. But earlier, as I overheard you all talking on the set, I've seen you many times, the question of who leads the Democratic Party.
That's where I was going. You're reading my mind, Symone. You know exactly where I'm going. Who right now is the most powerful Democrat in the country right now?
I mean, until the House returns come in, maybe it's Hakeem Jeffries. I still think let me just back up. President Biden and Vice President Harris are still very powerful Democrats. There's a question of who is leading the strategy for the way forward. That is something that I don't think Democrats know right now at this point. I mean, it's 24 hours after an election that many Democrats expected to win. So that is a question that they are going to have to come to an answer on in the coming weeks and months. But the new DNC chair will be now elected by the Democratic National Committee members, and that person and the vice chairs that are elected will be in charge of the strategy writ large going forward. I think there's a lot of people that would like to have their name in the hat for 2028.
Hakeem Jeffries came to mind to me as well. Tell our viewers just a little bit about him.
Yes, Hakeem Jeffries is currently right now the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives. We are still waiting on returns from California and Arizona for the House races. He could become the first black speaker of the House. He served in the state legislature in New York for a very long time. He is young and he is strategic, and he has really been able to govern with Republicans, frankly, in a way that I don't think a lot of Democrats had on their bingo card. So that is that part. Can I say one thing about Vice President Harris and her speech? I think people forget in this time, we are only 60 years removed from the civil rights movement, from Jim Crow in this country. Right? Like Vice President Harris 60 years ago, she was born. She just turned 60 this year. Where she stood at Howard University and was established 157 years ago. So I think oftentimes we feel as though history is so far apart and America has come so far. America has come a very long way, but in a short amount of time. And in a lot of that time in our nation's history, the building of a multiracial democracy has been met with fits and starts. I'm talking about Reconstruction. And so the history of this time is being written like in live color. And I don't think we really know the impact of it as we sit in it. But, 60 years from now, what happened this week and what's going to happen in the coming months are going to be critical.
As we mark that moment in our history, and I'm glad we did, I want to ask you another tough question. Was she put in an unfair position? 100 days of her life, she's told, I'm out, you're now in. Get ready for a convention. Get ready for a debate. There's going to be no primary. You're going to have to run this campaign. Oh, and you're probably going to have to change a lot of your positions down. You have to go out there and explain everything. Was she put in...
You make it sound so rosy.
Was she put in... I mean, look, and running for president has to be difficult, right? Because it's a difficult job. But was she put in an unfair position?
The vice president no one told her she had to be the Democratic nominee. She raised
I guess I should ask you this. Was the president selfish? Was the president selfish? Should he have said, listen, I'm too old to do this. I see my polling numbers. It's not going to work out. Let's have a process, or at least let's get the vice president ready earlier.
I am one of these people that don't believe that Joe Biden could not have come close in this election. I'm somebody
You think he could have won?
I think that the public flogging of the sitting vice president of the United States of America by leaders very high up in his own party did not bode well for his vice president that stood loyally next to him more than people who'd known Joe Biden 40
Explain
years.
that point.
What do you mean?
Explain that.
All these Democrats that got on, all these House Democrats that got on television, chief among them, former Speaker Emergent Nancy Pelosi, who said that they see it in Joe Biden can't win. They see it in the data. Democrats can't win with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. The same people, some strategists, some of which who, signed up for the Harris-Walz campaign. Some of the people in the podcast arena who said, oh, there needs to be an open primary, who said the vice president was not a viable candidate. Those people, I believe, were wrong
Undermined
then,
her.
and they were wrong now. I just think that everybody wants to, save face now. And I think people are trying to, do a little revisionist history. And there should be some introspective work happening with some of the strategists within the vice president's campaign. The vice president, she left it all on the field. Were there some strategic missteps? Yes. We will hear more about those in the coming days and weeks. But let's just be very clear. This campaign raised $1 billion. If you have money to advertise on the Sphere, but I'm hearing from key groups across the country, like I can name the NAACP because Derek Johnson, the president, publicly talked about it, where they could not get money from the campaign to do voter outreach, right?
And they have $1 billion.
And they have $1 billion, and you got money you are advertising on the Sphere, but you have groups where you haven't done your work. To me, that says we got to do a little soul search.
I know you saw this. I want to put this up for our viewers. This is from Bernie Sanders, guys. I want to put this graphic up for us, right? Senator Bernie Sanders, who won his re-election campaign last night and ran for the Democratic nomination in 2020, will remember. He issued a statement saying, it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is Latino and black workers as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Your colleague, former Senator Claire McCaskill, said something I thought was very brave on Morning Joe. I think she said it today, and I'm not quoting her exactly, but she said, we have to admit Donald Trump knew where the country was, and we didn't. Do you think that's fair? Do you think what Bernie Sanders is saying is fair?
I used to work for Senator Sanders, another one of my former bosses. Look, I think it's really important that we look at the data. And there was Donald Trump made a gain with black men voters by 1%. Vice President Harris won the same amount of black voters that Joe Biden won in 2020. So to me, that says it wasn't black voters. I think that Jose Diaz-Balart, he often says that there's not a Latino vote in this country. Yes. There are Latino voters.
Right.
And that is something I think that in the last couple of cycles, the Democratic Party has identified Latino men. They have not figured out how to specifically talk to the wide swath of Latino voters. Do I think that the party, the Democratic Party has never won white working class people. Mm-hmm. Not even Bill Clinton won white working class people. And I know because I asked the pollster and the former president. So I think there needs to be a realization that Democrats want to make. There are some missteps that were made from a strategic perspective, yes. But I would also argue that the vice president did leave it all on the field. Yes, it was 105 days. Yes, but also maybe, just maybe, some people in the country wanted what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were selling. And America, we want to believe that we are just so much better than some of the things that happen within our country. And the reality is that perhaps maybe we are exactly who the voters are saying we are.
Last question, because I know
not black women, it wasn't them.
I could do 2 hours with you, but this is my last question for you. Do you think the Democratic Party will do some soul searching and then look beyond the establishment, look beyond the House and the Senate and governors and find an outsider like the Republicans have?
I think the Democratic Party has a very deep bench, right? And let's just be clear, Donald Trump I think he is a master marketer, right? I do not agree with a number of the policies and things that Donald Trump espouses, but he knows marketing. And he has successfully sold himself over the course of his entire career as a businessman. And there are voters that believe that Donald Trump, they believe that he is who he says he is when it comes to business and the economy and everything else. I think that some of them didn't hear what he had to say. I don't think Democrats need a quote-unquote outsider. I think that the Democratic Party apparatus, they need to take their time, they need to do some deep dive thinking, and then they need to get back to work because we don't know what the House looks like right now. There are Democratic senators that won in places where Vice President Harris lost. Every single Democrat on the ballot in North Carolina, statewide, that was on the ballot, they won. Vice President Harris is the only Democrat who was on the ballot statewide in North Carolina who lost. I want people to take a look at who was on the ballot statewide in North Carolina.
Symone Sanders, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your analysis. And I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot in the days and months ahead.
Good to see you.
Okay, let's turn now to Wall Street and the economy. We mentioned at the top of the show that stocks rallied sharply today with all three major indices hitting record highs for the best day since 2022, reacting to Donald Trump's presidential election win. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surging over 1,500 points to a record high. S&P 500 also hitting an all-time high, up 2.5%. And the NASDAQ climbed nearly 3% as well, a record of its own. I want to bring in some of these numbers with NBC News' senior business correspondent, Christine Romans. Christine, thank you for standing by there. I went a little long, I know, with Simone. I saw you pacing there, ready to bubble up with your stock information. But, Christine, I do want to ask you, what has history taught us? I remember this happened in 2016. The stock market sort of went wild.
Right.
I don't know if it happened right away, but I remember it took off. Does this last? Does this rally last? What does it mean?
I mean, it can be overdone, and that's, quite frankly, 2016 is a good example. You know, there'll be a big reaction, and then it'll try to settle out. And remember, you're in a situation now where the Fed's going to start cutting interest rates, or has been cutting interest rates. There's a Fed meeting tomorrow. So there are a lot of different things happening overall in terms of the economy. But mostly, I think the message of last night, or was it last night? The message of the last 24 hours, quite frankly, is that just how sour people felt about the economy. The stock market's been booming, frankly, for 9 years. It's up, I think, 80 or 90% over the past 5 years alone. But people didn't really feel it. And the stock market reaction today is simply euphoria about lower rates and deregulation.
I see you have some of our exit polls there.
I do.
What have you been able to glean from that?
So one of these is really kind of interesting, and I was talking to our polling people about this when you and I have talked about this all morning. 46% of families said the financial situation is worse today than 4 years ago. So we looked into the archives. This is the biggest number of worse off than any time we've ever taken this poll going back to the 90s. This is even worse than 2008, the great financial crisis. Tom, back then, factories were closing. Every neighborhood had homes that were being foreclosed. People were losing their jobs. The stock market was actually crashing. And that was the last time people felt, well, they feel worse today than they did then. So a real disconnect with the overall numbers in the economy, I think, and how people feel. And it's because of, you know what the word is, right? It's because of inflation. We have family finances twice here. It's because of inflation. And when you look at here, who do you trust more to handle the economy? Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the one who gets the higher marks.
Yeah. I mean, do voters, do we know what those economic promises by President-elect Trump was going to mean for our economy? I know The Economist came out. Harris was running against his economic plan. What do we know?
So we know that the economy is resilient right now. So Trump inherits an already strong economy and interest rates that are falling. He has promised mass deportations. Almost all economists say that's bad for the labor market, that's bad for the construction market, that's bad for the farm market, that's bad for the economy. He has promised a bunch of tariffs. That could be inflationary. Tariffs, especially for lower income people. Tariffs are like an income, they're like an import tax, and they raise the cost of goods. There's some concerns that all the promises he made on the campaign trail could be expensive, $7.5 trillion over a decade. He's going to need Congress to do some of the things that he wants to do, right? And he may have Congress for that, you know, by the way. But at least for now, Wall Street is euphoric at the idea of cutting regulations. Tom, I was looking at small cap stocks. These are smaller companies. They had an even better performance today. Why? Because regulation, the cost of regulation is one of their kind of highest costs. And Trump has promised to just blow through more regulations like he did first time around. That means some smaller companies will make more money.
Okay. Christine Romans, we thank you for standing by, and we thank you for breaking all that down for us. Still ahead tonight, the White House not the only shift coming out of this election. Republicans taking control of the Senate once again. So far, the House has not been called or projected just yet. Ryan Nobles, he knows Congress inside and out. He joins us live next where things stand there. Stay with us. This special edition of Top Story is just getting started. Back now with this special edition of Top Story post-election night. We're breaking down the results of last night's historic election. Back at the big board now, we are joined live by our Capitol Hill correspondent, one of the best out there, Ryan Nobles. Ryan, so great to have you here. This is where NBC News has projected where the Senate is going to stand right now. Republicans have control, 52 to Democrats 44. Still 4 races uncalled. I want to talk about what happened in Montana. I think the spending here broke records. Walk our viewers through what happened and how Tim Sheehy, a relatively unknown person, was able to beat the incumbent.
Yeah, I mean, he won here pretty easily, Tom. It did take us a while for us to call this, but the reason that it took a while is because he was running so far behind Donald Trump. Donald Trump won by a much bigger margin than what you see here, in part because John Tester is a long-term incumbent. He was running for his fourth term, had a deep connection with the state that went beyond party politics, but it just was not enough in this state. Tim Sheehy got Donald Trump's endorsement early. He ran as a MAGA candidate. That really resonates with the folks in Montana, and that's why we saw this result the way it was.
It shows the power that the president-elect has in red states. Let's talk about Wisconsin here. This at first looked like she was going to win, and then Hovde little by little chipped away at it, right?
Yeah. But I have to tell you, Tom, this is kind of the sleepy story of this election, that Democrats in the Senate actually did a pretty good job when you consider the map and you consider how well Donald Trump did. This is an example. This is a state that Donald Trump won, but the Democrats are going to pull out a win. That means that Tammy Baldwin had to convince a lot of Trump voters to cast a ballot for her as opposed to Eric Hovde, who was a Donald Trump guy. And the same situation plays out in Michigan, if you want to look at that as well. And this is Alyssa Slotkin, who is not the incumbent here. She is a congresswoman, never represented the entire state until now. She was taking on Mike Rogers, who had quite a bit of name ID in the state of Michigan.
former FBI, right?
Right, and also a former chair of the Intelligence Committee. But you know what's interesting, and maybe this plays out as we talk to voters after the fact, Mike Rogers, for a pretty significant period of time, was a bit of a Trump detractor. Right. He wasn't somebody that was on the Trump train from the beginning. He made things right with Trump. Trump endorsed him, but perhaps that's why we see him running behind Trump here and why Slotkin pulls it out.
Okay, let's turn things over in the House. I'm going to switch the map up. I'm going to let you take the steering wheel. Walk us through what we're seeing.
Right. So we still have about 41 races that are not called right now. And the situation is that Republicans have the advantage. Democrats are catching them. And as you can see, the difference here, the Democrats need to pick up more seats than the Republicans do. And so where are they going to do that? Well, they're going to do it here in California. That's going to be the key. There's a number of races here that we've called. District 20 is an example of one. But let's see here as an example. Okay, so David Vallado, these are races where Republicans or Democrats, I say, are trying to take out Republicans in a seat here. This is incumbent, 52 are the percentage. He's trailing here quite a bit. But let's go to Arizona now. And in Arizona, District 2, we see Eli Crane squeaking out a win. That was a state or a district that Democrats had hoped that they had a chance of winning. And then down here in District 6, this is one that Democrats desperately need if they have any chance of taking back the House. Juan Ciscomani, freshman Republican. Kristen Engel, somebody who Democrats had high hopes of winning this state. This is a border county. And right now we see a razor-thin difference between the two and a whole lot of vote that still has to come in. So that's why at this stage we aren't ready to call the House.
And we don't know how Arizona and Nevada have ended up in the presidential race, so it's tough to make comparisons there. What does your gut tell you? Can I ask you that? Are you allowed to say your gut feeling?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just look at the numbers, right? If you look at the path, there's an easier path here for Republicans than there are for Democrats. 41 seats available. Republicans already have a 207-seat margin. But within these 41 seats, there are more Democratic seats that need to be pickups than there are Republican seats. So just by the sheer math, it's more of an effort for Democrats. That doesn't mean they can't do it, but I'd rather be a Republican. I'd rather be Mike Johnson than Hakeem Jeffries.
Last question. Any idea when we're going to know?
It could take a long time because no matter what, Tom, this is going to be a razor-thin majority. Yeah. If Democrats have the majority, if Republicans have it, it's only going to be by a handful of seats. So that means we've got to wait for all the votes to be counted. There could potentially be a recount because so many of these races are close, so it could take some time.
Ryan Nobles, again, one of the best out there. Ryan, we appreciate that. Coming up, President-elect Trump's foreign policy. He's stepping into the White House while two wars are unfolding overseas. What his role will be, what he has promised, and what he can actually do. Richard Engel standing by for us. You're watching a special edition of Top Story. We're back now with our special coverage of the 2024 election. The ripple effects of Trump's projected win here at home already being felt across the globe. The president-elect set to return to the world stage as wars rage in the Middle East. Excuse me. Oh, sorry about that. As wars rage in the Middle East, it's been a long 2 days for me. For more on the international implications, I want to bring in Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, excuse me for that sneeze here. I'm going to grab
all last night.
Oh,
I'm surprised you're still on your feet. I was watching you last night going district by district, telling the world, telling America, the local politics, who was winning in one place. So one sneeze is excused.
Thank you. I appreciate that. As I was doing that, thinking about our Americans here, obviously, throughout the country and the votes that we're taking in, I was thinking about the world and how the world was watching this election. We know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has congratulated President-elect Trump. What's going to happen there? He says he can solve it in a day. Is that true?
He says he can solve Ukraine in a day.
Ukraine in a day, but it could also solve what's happening in Israel and Gaza as well.
So he can solve everything, right? He says he can fix. He's Mr. Fix-It. That was his last rebrand. But let's take them one at a time. You want to start with Israel? You want to start with Ukraine?
Israel.
So Israel, you have to look at what Prime Minister Netanyahu has been saying consistently over the last several weeks in particular. And he's been focused on Iran for his entire career, but the last several months, let's say, it's really been all about Iran. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is selling this vision where the Abraham Accords, which are the accords that President Trump brokered, peace accords between Israel and several Arab states, that the Abraham Accords, which President Trump is really very, very proud of, Jared Kushner is very proud of, they talk about it all the time. He wanted to get a Nobel Prize. He thought he should have gotten the Nobel Prize for it. To turn the Abraham Accords into a military alliance against Iran. I think that's what Netanyahu wants to do. That's what he says he wants to do. He said that in front of Congress, got a big standing ovation from MAGA supporters in the House.
Does Trump's election, does it change anything, Richard?
Well, yes. It seems that Netanyahu believes he can carry out this mission now that President Trump is in office. Prime Minister Netanyahu has already launched a war against Hamas, which is backed by Iran. He's launched a war against Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran. But he's had shown some restraint in attacking Iran directly. President Biden, if you remember, said, don't hit the nuclear sites, don't hit the oil facilities, and he didn't. Very likely because he was waiting for this moment when President Trump would come in, they could go back to their working relationship and focus their attention, political attention, and I would say military
Any
attention.
chance of a ceasefire deal? Is that going to happen?
They could announce on Iran. They could announce the ceasefire deal. You can announce anything. So I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu announces something
to help Trump.
To help Trump, to give him a gift, say, well, you arrived and we have now the end of major military operations. You can call it a ceasefire operation, a ceasefire deal. But I don't think that
is going to help the hostage situation.
Maybe.
Okay.
You never know about that. Maybe you get some hostages freed. Maybe you get some hostages rescued. But I don't think he's going to ever go for a two-state solution or he's ever going to pull out entirely of military forces from Gaza. Gaza was a prison before. It will probably become a supermax now with a Israeli military presence inside, Israeli operations ongoing, maybe at a lower level. But he can call that a ceasefire deal. He can call it the end of major military operations. But if you're in Gaza, I think your future is very different.
That was one of two tweets last night, right? One was Benjamin Netanyahu thanking President-elect Trump. The other was President Zelensky in Ukraine thanking President Trump, or at least congratulating him.
Yes,
and also giving him compliments as well. As
giving him compliments, saying you're on the right track. And two different. I believe Netanyahu is very sincere. He's very excited. His own political future was riding on this in many ways. He's preparing for this new phase where there's this U.S. and Israeli alliance against Iran. He just fired his defense minister. And then, Zelensky doesn't buy this. He's been very afraid of President Trump. He's afraid that President Trump is going to pull the plug on the aid, stop the flow of weapons, stop the money going. And President Trump has made it pretty clear that that's
something J.D. Vance has talked about as well.
And something that President Trump has talked about, how too much money goes that way. He calls Zelensky the greatest salesman. Not in a complimentary way. He says that every time he comes, he sells the war and he walks away with billions of dollars, and that has to stop. So I think basically the war, as we've known it for the last several years, has come to an end in Ukraine. Some new phase is coming, and many Ukrainians feel that they're going to be forced by a lack of resources to accept a deal that requires them
surrenders the land in the east.
Maybe 20% of their territory to Russia, and that it means surrendering 20% of their land to Russia, and it also sends a message that Putin force works, that you can gobble up land and not pay apology.
There'll be a lot to talk about, I know, in the days and months and years
We
ahead
didn't
about
talk
foreign
about
policy.
China. We didn't talk about Taiwan.
But top stories on every night. We'll be able to talk about all that every single night. Trust me, I have a lot of questions for you.
I hope you get some sleep.
And just also in our hemisphere as well, Latin America, South America, Central America, Cuba. There's
a lot of
yeah.
Latin American leaders are quite happy he's back. There's quite a few Central American leaders happy he's back. African leaders who are happy he's back because they run similar kind of one-man show regimes, and they feel they can work with Trump. They can do business with Trump. Yeah. So it's
we can do a whole hour. We are gonna do a whole hour on what's happening overseas. Richard, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. We're gonna have much more of the 2024 election results right after this break. Many expecting a much closer race based on polling. So what happened? One of the country's most well-known pollsters joins Top Story next to help break it down. All right, welcome back to our special coverage of last night's historic election. As we continue to digest the results, I want to bring in one of the most well-known pollsters in all of America, Frank Luntz, political consultant and author of the book Words That Work. Frank, thanks for being here tonight. First things first, give me sort of the autopsy, if you will, on the polling, the political polling in America leading up to this election and the results that we saw.
Well, the worst one was the Des Moines Register poll. And that one was not just wrong, it was absolutely dead wrong. They had Harris up by 3 points. It changed the entire coverage of the last 48 hours. 3 points in Harris's direction. Trump won the state by more than 10 points. It was an embarrassment for the polling industry. The other surveys, for the most part, had Trump and Harris dead even. So you'll be off by 2%. That's not a big deal. In some of these states, they were not measuring the fact that Trump had caught up to Harris and moved ahead of her. And it's one of the challenges that I gotta say, you're spending too much time on polling and not enough on policy. The public is interested in the horse race, but what they really care about is what you're going to do on immigration, what you're going to do on affordability, what you're going to do on national security. And in the end, there's too much of this horse race stuff and not enough on the real stuff that matters, because that's going to change people's lives. And in the end, that's what our responsibility actually is, to tell people the truth about where America stands and what these politicians are going to do.
So, Frank, let's stay there, right? Let's marinate on that then. You wrote the book Words That Work. What worked for President Trump?
Well, the fact is, a great question, simple question, but it's exactly it, because I was one of those people who thought he would not come back. And I was one of those people who thought after that disastrous debate where he really did badly, that he was done. And he wasn't. First, his support is so hardcore. Never in my adult life have I seen any politician who has more people, more dedicated, more loyal, more intense and passionate. You can add all the superlatives and you still won't get there, because they will walk through water, they will walk through fire to get Donald Trump elected. And Harris simply didn't have that. And the second thing about Trump is that he was prepared to say anything. So he got people talking. He got them engaged. He got people to consider what had happened over the last 4 years. And frankly, it was not successful. And the public finally decided that rather than go backward with Harris to repeat Joe Biden, because remember, she had said, I can't see any difference between myself and Joe Biden, which turned out to be one of the worst statements of the election campaign. Trump, was able to say, go forward with me, and the public saw this as the future rather than Harris, Vice President Harris being the future.
Frank, our entire lives right now, the storytelling process, we tell ourselves, we tell our friends and family, it's done through moments, right? Social media, if it's Instagram, if it's Twitter, if it's TikTok, everything is in moments. How did the American electorate sort of forget or put on the back burner the moment of January 6th? I don't need to dwell on January 6th, but I can't forget January 6th because I covered it. It was a crime scene at the Capitol. And obviously it's still going to be litigated in the courts. It might get dropped now. But how did America move past that, and why do you think they did?
By the way, these are great questions. And in the end, Americans must consider what happened on January 6th, because it was not ordinary. It wasn't even extraordinary. It was once in a lifetime occasion that really was a threat to what was happening in our government. The fact is that senators and congressmen were quite literally running for their lives is something serious. But in the end, The public doesn't look backward. They're not rewarding someone for the job they've done. They're projecting into the future. And once again, it's not really Trump's mistakes. It's Harris's mistakes that I want to focus on. She never looked at the camera, as I am right now, look the American people straight in the eye and say, this is what I'm going to do in the first hour, then the first day, then the first week, then the first month, then the first 100 days. And you get the idea. She never actually did that, so we never knew where she stood. With Donald Trump, we absolutely knew what he was going to do. So we did not need to see specific plans because he'd already been president. She, I believe, ran one of the worst campaigns, and I'm sorry that my language is not following your video here, but I think she ran one of the worst campaigns, and she made the same mistake that Hillary Clinton did, assuming that she was going to get elected, assuming that the public would not vote for Donald Trump, and that was an absolutely fatal assumption.
Frank Luntz, always great to talk to you, my friend. Always learn something. Thanks for being on the special edition of Top Story. I'm sure we're going to check back with you a lot in the coming days and weeks. When we come back, our political pros join us here on set with what 4 more years of a Trump administration could mean for the country. Stay with us. We're back now with our special coverage of the 2024 election as we wrap up this hour. We want to take a look at the major takeaways from this year's unprecedented election. Joining me now are our political pros. Mark Lauder, a Republican strategist and former director of strategic communications for Trump's 2020 campaign. And Julie Roginski. She's a Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter. I love that name. Thank you both for joining us. Julie, I'm going to start with you. We've talked all night about it. If you can go back in time, would you have asked President Biden not to run? Would you have asked for there to be a primary process, or would you have wanted President Biden to ride this out all the way to November?
Well, I wouldn't want him to ride it out all the way to November, because I think after what we saw at the debate, that was just untenable. Look, if we had had more time, if he had gotten out a year earlier, would we have had a primary? I think a primary is always healthy. Having said that, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback this, right? Like, I think she ran the best campaign she could, Kamala Harris, in the time that she had. I think the problem actually wasn't Kamala Harris. I don't think the problem was Joe Biden. I think that the Democratic Party has lost a little bit of touch with common sense. So that when
Give me an example.
Well, give me an example. You see college kids shutting down, I mean, right here in New York City, shutting down halls on Columbia campus. And people don't know what to say. What do? We don't want to offend the kids. The kids have a right to talk about what they have to talk about. We don't want to do anything. We don't know what to say. How about you say, if you disrupt a college campus to prevent people from studying, I don't care what your ideology is, you're out of here, right? And yet it's the same kind of constant, like, coddling that I think a lot of people in places like Bucks County, spend a lot of time in Northampton County, Pennsylvania. We have a house out there, so I spend a lot of time out there. And people kind of look at this and say, what is going on? It's not the same common sense you would apply in your own life. And I think that's something Democrats need to really dwell on right now.
Mark, I was talking to Frank Luntz about this, but the American electorate either didn't care about the criminal indictments, or they forgot about it, or they looked past it. They looked past January 6th. How do you think that happened? Because I don't know if there's a lot of politicians that could have survived that.
Well, I think it varies for everyone. I mean, I think there are some out there that saw it as a protest that turned into a riot. There were some that said, well, why did we look the other way while BLM torched our cities and caused more damage, death, and destruction? So it's okay when they do it, but not when we do it. I think there were a lot of reasons for it. But ultimately, I think it didn't come down to one single issue. And I said this, I forget, it might have been with you a couple of weeks ago, Tom, when Kamala started making the argument of January 6th, threats to democracy, on the ellipse, and abortion, I knew that was a problem for her, because those are not new issues. I mean, if January 6th or Dobbs was your deciding factor, well, Dobbs happened 2 years ago. January 6th happened nearly 4 years ago. You made up your mind. If you're trying to win new voters, that's not the way to go.
But it's interesting, Julie, because the top two issues, I think abortion was third, but the top issue was state of democracy, and number 3, I think, was abortion. Were you surprised, because we had this conversation 2 nights ago, that abortion didn't play a bigger role in sort of deciding the president?
I'm very surprised, and I'll tell you why. You look at places like Pennsylvania, where Susan Wild won 2 years ago, largely very, swing district, largely on the back of Dobbs, right? She had been elected she was in a really tough race, and then she got reelected because of Dobbs, as did a lot of other people like her. And then she lost. She lost yesterday. Yeah. Again, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, first time, I think, since the 80s that it went Republican. Those are suburban women. They care about Dobbs. Those are the same kinds of people that came out and voted for Democrats 2 years ago. It's not like Dobbs has gotten away.
So
in fact, things have gotten worse. You know, that's a great question. I think it comes back to Frank Valenza's point from earlier. A lot of it has to do with looking forward. A lot of it has to do with, as I said, common sense. I think between all the protests that were going on with the college campuses, I think all the stuff that people were talking about with boys being able to play in girls' sports and vice versa. And by the way, you know, people looked at that and they said, it's a fundamental issue of, I just can't wrap my mind around it. Whether it's right or wrong, I can't wrap my mind around it. And Democrats consistently try to put ourselves into pretzels because we try to sound like we're inclusive and we try to sound like we're accepting of everybody, as we should. But our communication is awful. The one thing I will also say is I think the White House's communications team, and I'm so sorry to say this, has been awful from the beginning. Because rather than have these meme fights with Steve Doocy from Fox and trying to make that into a viral moment, why don't you start talking to the American people about what you're doing for them? And I think from day one, that was a mistake that they made. And I hope that the next White House, not Trump, but the next Democratic White House doesn't make that same mistake.
Mark, are we going to see anything different in this second term? My argument yesterday, or at least my point, was that the first time President-elect Trump, he didn't know what he was doing. He had never been to Washington. He had never been a president. He's done it for 4 years. He's going to do it again. Does that change anything on what we should expect to happen, at least maybe in the first 100 days?
I think it'll happen much faster. I walked in, we were talking about this last night, or this morning in our coverage, and I walked into the Oval Office with him for the first time as president on January 20th, 2017. And I think we had 2 executive orders ready to go. I think Joe Biden had like 40 or 50 ready to go. But the people who were at the end, who were there still at the end in the agencies, in the White House, they've still been working that entire time. And he has that experience. So where the transition wasn't ready to go in 2016 because the Republican Party wasn't fully on board, you had House and Senate members that weren't running with him. They were
fired Chris Christie.
Well, there were a lot of reasons for that. But, you know, but those people are all now, like, the people who are with him are there. The policies are ready to go. And he knows how to get it done. And more so, it's not just the executive order. It is, what does that cabinet secretary say to the career civil servants, and how do you actually execute these things? And so having those people who know how the levers of government actually work, he'll be able to do things much quicker this time around.
Julia, I'm going to give you the last word here. Who do you hope rises up or maybe gets the spotlight in the Democratic Party as the next sort of face of the party?
You know, that's a great question, and I think there is a tremendous bench, and I'd like to see who goes through that bench, right? I actually do want a really robust primary because you have people like Josh Shapiro, you have people like Gavin Newsom, you have people like Gretchen Whitmer. You have so many different people who are potential rock stars and people we haven't thought about. Remember, Barack Obama just popped up out of nowhere in 2004, and then 4 years later became president. So there are too many people to think about. I just hope we survive the next 4 years to have another election. I'm not so sure, based on what you said, that Donald Trump is actually intending to do that, but we'll see.
Julie and Mark Lauder, we thank you both for being here. Thanks so much for joining this special edition. Stay right there. Our special coverage of the 2024 election results continues right now with this special expanded edition of Top Story.
Decision 2024, a special edition of Top Story continues. Here is Tom Llamas.
And good evening. We thank you for joining us tonight. Our nation's political landscape shifting dramatically once again as former President Trump becomes the president-elect, soon to become the 47th commander-in-chief, defying the odds in a stunning comeback. The former president defeating Vice President Kamala Harris, reclaiming the office he lost just 4 years ago. Let's walk you through where the Electoral College count stands right now with some of the battleground states yet to be called. So right here, here's where we stand. We are still waiting to call Nevada and Arizona. Alaska, not a battleground, likely to go red. We're still waiting on that as well. Former President Trump also leading in the popular vote. You can see the numbers right here. I'm going to squint and see where we're at. Look at those numbers, right? More than 72 million for President-elect Trump, more than 67 million for Vice President Kamala Harris. If Trump wins the popular vote, he'll be the first Republican candidate to do so in 2 decades. Vice President Harris delivering a powerful and emotional concession speech today at her alma mater, Howard University, urging her supporters to keep up the fight.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, tearing up, at least it appeared that way, while he was standing alongside Harris's husband and their family. Walz just posting to X saying, quote, "Thank you, Vice President Kamala Harris, for putting your faith in me and selecting me as your running mate. Campaigning at your side was the honor and privilege of my life." So how did Trump clinch such a decisive victory? Take a look at this. He grew his support across nearly all demographics, including some of the historically supportive ones of Democrats. And let's get a check of the balance of power as we talk about right now in the Senate. Republicans taking control of the Senate. You see it right here, 52 to 44. This is the projection by the decision desk here at NBC News. Right now, control of the House, though, is still up for grabs. It is still in play. Here's a look at where that situation stands right now. Those are the Senate pickups. We'll see the House map right after this graphic. It should come up right now. Okay, here it is. Still waiting on some votes there, 40 uncalled so far. And Ryan Nobles was just telling us it's going to take some time to figure that number out. NBC's Dasha Burns joins us tonight from West Palm Beach, Florida. Dasha, you are ever the intrepid reporter, especially when it comes to political news. What are your sources telling you? What is President-elect Trump focused on right now?
Well, look, the former president now begins that complicated process of the transition, right? We know that today he spoke to both President Biden, who invited him to the White House, and Vice President Harris, who conceded and told him that she hopes he will focus on unity. The Trump campaign say that they agree. He's also been having some conversations with world leaders. I know you talked to Richard Engel earlier, the whole world reacting to this. And he is now focused on what that next step will look like. He's had some folks in place for the transition. The transition team has been working already, but now he himself is going to get involved, and heavily involved at that. We know that he is going to prioritize folks that don't have a government background similar to himself. We know that Don Jr., his son, is likely to have a lot of input there as well, Tom.
And Dasha, I also want to talk about what Trump's cabinet could look like. There's been a lot of talk about RFK Jr. possibly being Trump's, quote, health czar. Those are his words. When you spoke to Trump before the election, he said RFK Jr. would have a, quote, big role in the administration. Our NBC's Vaughn Hilliard spoke to RFK this morning and pressed him on some of those comments on vaccines. Let's listen.
You have been a crusader on questioning vaccines. Are there specific vaccines that you would seek to take off the market?
Oh, I'm not going to take away anybody's vaccines. I've never been anti-vaccine.
You will not take any vaccine that is currently on the market.
I'm not. If vaccines are working for somebody, I'm not going to take them away.
What are you hearing about a possible role for RFK Jr. and what other names are coming up in the cabinet conversation, Dasha?
Well, we know the former president wants to give him a big role when it comes to the nation's public health. HHS secretary is something that RFK had been interested in, but it just depends on how much control of the Senate they have. It might be difficult for him, given some of his controversial views, to make it through a Senate confirmation process. And look, Tom, Elon Musk, the Musk of it all, the former president owes a lot to Musk, potentially the state of Pennsylvania, where he spent tens of millions of his own dollars and his time there. And he said he wants to get involved in helping the former president dismantle some of the bureaucracy and potentially slash government spending by a lot. There are some other names that are coming up. Senator Marco Rubio, for example, potentially for Secretary of State. Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman, potentially for a role with the UN. Some other names like Doug Burgum, who was, of course, the former president's opponent in the primary, potentially for Secretary of Interior. A lot more names will be coming forward in the coming days, Tom.
Dasha Burns, who spent 2 years of her life out on the campaign trail. Dasha, incredible reporting from the get-go. I know your work is just getting started right now. We thank you for a very intense campaign season. All right, I want to get to NBC senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who's been following the Harris campaign. Gabe, you were in the crowd for Harris's concession speech at Howard. Talk to me about what you heard from her.
Hi there, Tom. Well, yeah, we're here at Howard University. I just moved outside, but inside, just a few hours ago, it is Vice President Harris's alma mater, and it was an emotional speech for some of the supporters there. We actually saw in the crowd several women that, broke down in tears when they were listening to the Vice President. Also, as you mentioned, her running mate, Tim Walz, appeared to tear up as well. And this was a speech that she had been working on for most of the day, Tom, and she really tried to strike a balance here of unity, but as you played a little earlier, she was not giving up on the fight. And so while this was a bit of a unifying message behind the Constitution, she urged her supporters to keep fighting. And she only mentioned President-elect Trump by name, but let's take a listen, by name once, I should say, but let's take a listen to what she had to say as part of her speech.
A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny.
And that's something we heard over and over again from the Vice President there, Tom, this peaceful transition of power. And that's something we expect to hear tomorrow as well. We're now learning that President Biden is set to deliver remarks at the White House in the Rose Garden to talk about the upcoming transition. He also spoke with former President Trump today, and so did the Vice President. Now, Tom, I have been speaking to some Democratic sources, and it's really interesting. There's a post-mortem going on, as you've been reporting, within the Democratic Party to try and figure out what went wrong. And I just got off the phone with one who said, look, Kamala Harris's message, in this source's view, was not simple like former President Trump's was. And look, we heard just over the past few weeks, I've been going to several battleground states, Michigan, North Carolina, and there was this one sign that really stood out to me, this yard sign, Tom, that I kept saying more and more of in the last couple of weeks. It was very simple. It said, Trump, low prices, Kamala, high prices. Right there in 6 words, it basically distilled the Republicans' message, and it also helps you understand why they were able to communicate with some of their voters, especially some of those voters in Pennsylvania. So this postmortem will continue. Of course, as we know, Senator Bernie Sanders is blasting Democratic leaderships for not focusing enough on the working class, but it will be something that will be discussed now for weeks and months to come. But again, we are awaiting the remarks tomorrow from President Biden, as we also know that he invited former President Trump to the White House in the near future to talk about this transition, Tom.
Gabe Gutierrez, part of our White House team that was pulling double duty, covering a White House and also working the campaign as well. Gabe, great work all throughout the campaign season. We appreciate you. Okay, we want to take a deeper dive into the numbers to see how Trump pulled off this historic win. With me at the big board where I'm headed right now is my good friend Mark Murray. Mark, I'm going to let you hang tight for a little bit there, just in front of the camera, not talking, just looking in there while I walk over. Should I walk really slow just to make this really awkward for you? I've known you for so many years.
Let's do it fast.
I would be able to laugh pretty hard at that. All right, let's talk about the big board. So, Mark, you're one of the best guys at NBC News that knows politics so well. Talk to me. Let's go to the president's race here. Talk to me about any battleground you want me to pull up here and what sort of surprised you and surprised a lot of us.
Tom, let's talk about Pennsylvania.
You got it.
Pennsylvania. And let's talk about Kamala Harris's underperformance in those collar Philadelphia suburban counties. You end up pulling out like Chester, for example. This is where, Joe Biden was able to win the presidency in 2020 because of counties like Chester, like Delaware County, like Montgomery County. And what he actually underperformed Hillary Clinton in 2016, but won
in Philadelphia,
but ended up winning those collar counties by so much. That's how he won Pennsylvania. But we end up seeing in this race, Kamala Harris, she underperformed Joe Biden. Now, what's notable is she underperformed him everywhere. But when we want to start, it's like, okay, how does she beat Donald Trump in Pennsylvania? It's starting with those Philadelphia suburbs.
And all you have to do is, this is the 2020 map. I'll come out of here. You got the 2020 map here. Where Biden won, and then you come to 2024, and you see there's just more red areas. I'm sorry. Let me go to the statewide. So this is 2020, 2024, and you can see how much more red there is on the map there. What else for you? What else did you notice that you thought was interesting?
Let's go to Michigan.
Okay.
And so we talked about the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about Wayne County, which is Detroit. And again, underperformance. Harris ended up winning.
Big underperformance, right?
Yeah, not as well. And again, worth noting in Wayne County, this is Dearborn.
Yeah.
And she did not do very well where a Democrat should normally do. And
we won't know exactly the makeup until a little. Explain that to our viewers.
Well, part of it is we're still getting returns. Right. And Wayne County, Detroit, is historically a very slow counting county. And so we're not going to get everything, but we have a really good chunk so far, and it's underperformance.
Let me talk to you about my hometown, Miami-Dade County, right? Because this was pretty historic. We haven't seen sort of a shift like this in a huge county in a long time. So Miami-Dade is the biggest area of the state of Florida, majority Hispanic. We can go, let's see, I think we can go one more back here. So you have a high watermark with Clinton, 63, right? And then you have Trump flipping this. You're going from a 30-point advantage to a 12-point advantage for Republicans. Again, in a place that is not just Cuban-American. There's Venezuelans, Colombians, Mexicans. I call it the capital of Latin America, the unofficial capital. What happened here?
Well, and Tom, let's even go back further to 2004, the first presidential race you and I started covering when John Kerry was trying to win Florida. This is like the Democratic base. South Florida is where, if you're going to try to
They have to drive up the votes.
But what has happened is a tremendous transformation, and a lot of it just has to do with the fact that Republicans and Donald Trump are doing better with Latino voters and doing better, and that's the whole ballgame here. And so, that steady erosion, really manifested itself.
Does the map change? So we have the battleground states, right? Does the map change in any way when we come out of here? When we first started covering politics, Ohio and Florida were battlegrounds. I can remember even Colorado was a battleground. And the map changes over time. Will any of these states, you think, change? Will they be red? Will they be blue?
Tom, the one that I still think that Democrats probably should not give up on is North Carolina.
Yeah.
And North Carolina, let's go there. Yeah. Because, and again, Donald Trump ended up winning. But you see all the...
And it doesn't look much different, right? This was 2020. Right. A couple small counties changed, but nothing major.
But look at all that blue. There's a lot more blue there than we ended up seeing in Pennsylvania because they're different pockets. You end up having the Research Triangle in Raleigh. You end up having
Mecklenburg. But they still have to turn out the vote here, right? They're still having issues trying to turn out the vote here, and she underperformed slightly, but they've always wanted to get more of the vote. It's been a challenge for them.
But one of the reasons I'm talking about North Carolina, not only because it's electoral, the math there, but also there's going to be some Senate contests in 2026 and 2028. Democrats don't control the Senate now. Maybe their path is through North Carolina.
So you think North Carolina is still going to be on the map, still going to be a huge
and honestly, and here's the one thing, Tom, to keep in mind, every presidential race changes. Donald Trump changed the map for the Republican Party. Barack Obama changed it for Democrats. And so I'm of the belief the next successful presidential candidate will probably have a different map.
I've been asking people this all throughout the night. Republicans, they went outside the box. An outsider came in, Donald Trump. He changed that entire party. When we see sort of trends right now, if it's the media, anti-establishment is very hot right now. People want to go to podcasts. They don't want to come to legacy media. Do you see an outsider, doing that with Democrats?
Yeah. And again, when we talk about whoever the next president's going to be after Donald Trump now, is that person will probably reinvent some type of different media. Think about everything that we've gone through. Barack Obama was Facebook. Donald Trump, Twitter. Now Donald Trump again with the podcast. There's going to be something new 4 years from now, 8 years from now. And if you want to communicate with voters, you have to meet them where they are.
That's true. Okay, Mark Murray, so great to have you on our team. Great night, an interesting night.
It was a lot.
Learned a lot, yeah. Okay, the support for Trump broke down into several key areas, primarily young Latinos and black voters. We're zooming in on all three tonight. First, we'll start with the youth vote. You see it here, Republicans making inroads with Democratic youth voters, Trump stealing some of those voters away, and also outperforming Harris with first-time male voters, 63% to 35%. For more on the youth vote in the 2024 presidential election, I'm joined tonight by NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson from Reno, Nevada. So, Steve, walk us through what you have and what the data is showing you.
Tom, my dude, my bro, I don't think we would have considered this name as a political operative before this election cycle. 18-year-old Barron Trump, Donald Trump, is absolutely citing his young teenage son of informing him of what's called bro culture, which is just what's cool with young Gen Z white males, and it absolutely worked. Keep in mind that this cycle, among young new voters, young new male voters who voted for the first time, 62% of them voted for Donald Trump. I want to throw some names at you of people that Trump either hung out with or did a podcast with in the run-up to the final days of the election. Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, Logan Paul, Dana White, Elon Musk, Hulk Hogan. These are people that absolutely define this sort of macho culture. And again, it looks like it absolutely worked. There's a podcast called the Full Send Podcast, which did this multi-million-dollar campaign to register kids across college campuses across the country which also absolutely worked. There was a holdup in the entire state of Nevada because lines were like 3+ hours at the University of Nevada, Reno last night, held up the process. And what it was young voters, young people who were registering to vote on the same day. It held up the process because of that. A reporter tweeted it out and said, you know what, this looks good for Democrats, young people looking to vote. But it was absolutely, these were Trump supporters. And then the final capper on all of this is that Donald Trump decides to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. He does the full 3 hours, not some sort of campaign blitz where they feed Joe Rogan questions and he answers them. He does the entire podcast. And I think that was so cementing in the final days of the election. This is something that Donald Trump did and Kamala Harris didn't, reaching those young male voters.
You know what he also did, too, that I don't know if it gets enough attention, but he would go to all the major UFC matches as well. He has that close relationship with Dana White, which is so big. It is one of the fastest growing sports for young male viewers.
Yeah, absolutely huge. Not only UFC, but he was at college football games. He was at Oklahoma wrestling matches. And if it doesn't feel like it made a difference, just look at the numbers. I mean, look at Wisconsin, +8 points from 2020 to 2024 when you're talking about young support. North Carolina, +9 points from 2020 to 2024. This doesn't even take into consideration these exit polls of places that are sort of non-battleground states. New York, I mean, Trump gained +10 points in New York. New Jersey, he lost by only 5 points. We were waiting until New Jersey was called late into the night last night. Place like Dearborn, Michigan, strong Arab American community, usually always Democratic. Trump, of course, picked up more votes there as well. And a lot of this, of course, is driven by young voters, and not just young white males, black males, Hispanic males, people that are sort of dialed into this culture and wanted to make a difference for Donald Trump.
Steve Patterson, really interesting look at the young voters there and how they shook up this election. I want to turn out to the Latino vote, possibly the biggest story of the night. Latino voters dramatically shifting towards Trump and the GOP. For more on the voters, NBC News correspondent David Noriega joins us live from Las Vegas. So, David, I want to put up some numbers here for our viewers. I want you to walk us through this. Here we can see just how far Latino voters shifted towards Trump, jumping from 32% in 2020 to 45% in 2024. Did you pick up anything from voters that would explain that dramatic realignment? And to remind our viewers, I know you've done a lot of reporting in Nevada, but I believe also in California and Arizona as well.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. So I've been talking to Latino voters in various states all year, as you know. And what I learned is that we need to think about this in terms of the economy and in terms of class. The voters that I spoke to all year who swung towards Trump, by and large, were motivated primarily or even exclusively by how hard it is to make a living, by the fact that they have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to support their families. And Tom, as you've been talking about this hour, this is not limited to Latino voters. Any number of demographics moved towards Trump in this election. This was a widespread national repudiation of the status quo as managed by the Biden administration and the Democratic Party. We also know from polling all cycle long that the top issue for most voters was the economy and the cost of living. Now, Tom, I also did consistently ask these voters, what about mass deportations? What about the anti-immigrant nativist character of Trump's campaign? Generally, the answer was they didn't think that applied to them and their families. They think it applied to other people. It's also important to remember, though, Tom, that a majority of Latinos did vote against Donald Trump, even though we did see this dramatic movement. For every voter like the one I'm describing, there are others who are now deeply, deeply concerned about what this means for them and their families, particularly those who live in mixed status communities who have undocumented loved ones. Tom? And then
looking at the map, do you see anywhere else where a Latino surge could change races as we look at the calendar in the years and months ahead?
Definitely, Tom. Let's just start with where I'm standing right now. Clark County, Nevada, the Las Vegas metro area. Historically, Clark County, by far the largest population in the state. The Democrats have carried this county and, as such, have carried the state of Nevada in each of the last several election cycles. This is, if they're still counting votes, but if Trump wins Nevada, this will be the first time that he does so. Democrats can no longer count on Clark County. The most of the votes are counted, and it is pretty much a tie between Harris and Trump, whereas in the past, it would have been 10 or another 15 points for the Democrat. Let's look at Pennsylvania, for example. Let's look at some more numbers. Pennsylvania, where there are large and fast-growing populations of Puerto Rican voters, precisely the people that a lot of people thought would be swayed against Trump by the comments at that Madison Square Garden rally. In Pennsylvania, we saw growth from 27% to 42% among Latino voters. That is a 15% increase, Tom. Let's look at Texas, right? A deep red state that nevertheless Democratic strategists have been talking for years, sort of under the premise that the browner, the more Latino Texas got, the bluer it would get, as happened with California in the last several decades. Turns out that that was not a sound premise. In Texas, from 44% support among Latino men, let's talk about men specifically because this change was driven primarily by men, 44% in 2020 for Joe Biden to 64% among Latino men in Texas for Donald Trump. These are dramatic shifts, and it's our job, Tom, to spend the next while understanding exactly why this happened and what it's going to mean for the future of America.
David Noriega for us. David, we appreciate that. The black vote also playing a huge role in this election, as expected, with Donald Trump able to make inroads in some key battleground states, despite Kamala Harris winning overwhelming support from black voters nationwide. For more on this, NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins me tonight from Milwaukee. Shaq, at the national level, Harris maintained the support of black men and women, but Trump was able to siphon off enough of the black vote in two states that really mattered, North Carolina and Wisconsin. Why didn't Vice President Harris' message of economic opportunity resonate in those key battlegrounds?
Well, Tom, I'll tell you, in some of the conversations I've been having with folks who ended up backing Trump in this election, they talk about the impact of the economy on their lives, talking about the reality that grocery prices, gas prices are higher now than they were 4 years ago. One person brought up to me today the fact that you have mortgage rates still significantly higher than those pandemic interest rates that existed, and it made it harder for this person to end up having the opportunity to purchase a home. But, Tom, you mentioned, you look nationwide, it is the fact that Vice President Harris won black voters overwhelmingly, essentially keeping pace with what President Biden did in the 2020 election. But when you look into those key battleground states, that's where you see that Donald Trump overperformed his 2020 performance. Look at North Carolina, for example. You saw his margin among black voters increase to double digits, largely on the backs of black men in that state. And then you look here to Wisconsin. He saw a double digit, or I should say, he saw his lead among black voters, or he saw his support among black voters here in Wisconsin more than double, going from 8 percentage points 4 years ago to 20 percentage points here in this election. I talked to Republicans here. They say this is not by accident. They talk about the investments that they've made in black neighborhoods, especially here in Milwaukee. But Democrats say that they've also been matching and meeting those investments. You saw, just looking at the candidate schedule in the past couple of days, the visits here in Milwaukee. In the end, what you saw in this city was there was an increase in overall turnout. But when you look into the specific numbers, you saw that Donald Trump was the candidate who picked up a few more votes than he did, even in this Democratic city, than he did 4 years ago, Tom.
Shaq Brewster, amazing analysis as always. Shaq, we appreciate that. We'll have much more to get to on this historic night, including one of the top issues of the election, abortion on the ballot in 10 states. So how did those measures do, and did reproductive rights drive voters to the polls like Democrats had hoped? Stay with us. We are back now with our special coverage of the 2024 election, and a major issue facing voters across the country this election was the issue of abortion. Take a look at this map. It shows ballot measures to protect abortion rights were approved in 7 states and failed in 3 states. It was an issue that motivated Democratic voters to turn out in the midterms after Roe versus Wade was overturned. You can see this in this year's race compared to 2020. The exit poll showed more voters believed abortion should be legal. For more on this issue, Priscilla Thompson joins us tonight from Phoenix, Arizona, one of the states that passed an amendment to protect abortion rights. Talk to us about that measure and when it failed in some states, what that means.
Yeah, so the measure that passed here would take the right to an abortion from 15 weeks up to 24 weeks around the time of fetal viability. But as you noted, there were 3 ruby red states where abortion access was not expanded, and that was Florida, South Dakota, and Nebraska. And it's interesting to talk about what happened there. So in Florida, a majority of voters did approve expanding access, but it didn't hit the 60% threshold that would have been needed to actually enshrine that into law. So the 6-week abortion ban on the books there is going to stand. But meanwhile, in Nebraska, you had 2 competing measures on the ballot. There was one that would expand access, and there was one that would codify it at the state's current 12-week ban. And what we saw is that 55% of voters voted to codify it at 12 weeks, and only 49% voted to expand it. So you're talking about a difference of around 6 points. But what's interesting there is that after Roe was overturned, we have seen these wins at the state level when expansion of abortion access is on the ballot. But this is the first time that we've seen a countermeasure on the ballot saying to not expand it, to stop it at a certain point. And that worked in Nebraska. So it will remain to be seen as we continue to see these state-by-state battles playing out, whether we see more of that being used as a strategy by those who oppose expanding access to abortions.
Priscilla, I know you were talking to voters there. How big of a motivator was it, right? Because I think it ranked 3rd on our top issues when we were asking voters in the exit polls.
Yeah, what we found is that it was a huge animating issue. In fact, almost every one of the Democrats that I spoke to at the polls and throughout the day today talked about abortion access. And that goes for men and women, people across ages talking about that as the issue that they were voting on. I want to play some of those conversations so you can hear the passion that we heard from voters here.
People are dying. Women that's can't carry a child, needing to have this child taken out, and you're telling me that this woman has to die because the doctors are scared, which is totally understandable.
One of them was the abortion. That was big for me. Even though I'm a male, I just feel like that's a right that you shouldn't be taken away from anyone. And I feel like if we start taking away some of those fundamental rights, what's next?
And I've even spoken to Republican voters who say that they feel like this is a state issue, and so it should be decided at the state level. And it's interesting to hear that and then look at the numbers in all of the 7 states where abortion access was expanded. The vote yes on that outpaced the votes for Vice President Kamala Harris. So this wasn't just Democrats who were voting to expand that access, but clearly there were Republicans and independents and people who did not support Harris for the presidency, but were also voting for expanded access to abortions in some of those states. Tom?
Priscilla Thompson for us tonight. Priscilla, we appreciate that. Our special coverage of the 2024 election continues. The election results surprising millions of Americans, and the race called much earlier than anyone expected. We speak to our political insiders about Harris's missteps and what a second Trump term is going to look like. Stay with us. Okay, back now with our special coverage of the 2024 presidential election. I want to bring in our political pros tonight. Matt Gorman, he's a Republican strategist and former communications advisor to Tim Scott. And Amisha Cross, she's a Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign advisor and a good friend of Top Story. We thank you both for being here. Matt, I'm going to start with you. You weren't a Trump supporter in the beginning of the primary process. You worked with Tim Scott. Were you surprised at how it played out?
I was, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was surprised how quick it all really happened. I thought we were going to be here maybe waiting for the Pennsylvania call like tonight. It really ended up very quickly. One thing I was not surprised, however, I think there was a lot of talk about, well, if Wisconsin goes this way, Georgia goes that way. It all kind of fell together, and I think we underestimated that collectively. They all could just move in one area.
Amisha, is this the end of Vice President Harris's political career?
I think that's up to Vice President Harris. I think that today there is a lot of looking back, looking at those crosstabs, trying to figure out what went wrong. But I also think that Kamala Harris, in terms of politics, in terms of her career trajectory, she's still quite young. She could decide that she wants to run again. But at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is doing a lot of inward looking around how to get back those working class voters, how to keep those numbers up, particularly in the urban centers, but also how to reach into the rural areas as well. And I think that they're also really tracking the Latino vote.
One of the rules of politics that I believe in, Matt Gorman, is that a politician's first day in office, they have one job, get reelected. Yep. So now President-elect Trump can't get reelected. What does that mean for these 4 years?
A couple things. I am very curious to see what is the first priority. Is it renewing the Trump tax cuts in office? What does he pick out?
Mass deportations.
Something. Yeah. What is it, right? Because I think a lot of the team feel like he chose wrongly by going after Obamacare first thing instead of, say, infrastructure or tax cuts. Does he make that first policy decision? And also looking back to where we were in 2016, he was very conciliatory to an extent for those 2 months of transition. He had interviewed Leslie Stahl saying, I kind of want to be presidential. And then, of course, the Muslim ban in office very quickly soured a lot of that. What does he do this time? That's what I'm watching.
Amisha, you know, I can remember when the guy you worked for, Barack Obama, when he got elected, a lot of pundits were saying it's the end of the Republican Party. And for 8 years, it wasn't a good time for the Republican Party, though the Tea Party was built. And you can argue that from the Tea Party, Republicans got Donald Trump. What do you think happens to Democrats in the next 4 years?
I think Democrats are kind of having a come-to-Jesus meeting around a few things. First and foremost, running up turnout numbers, but also acknowledging that there is a huge rift between individuals who have college degrees versus those who don't. 2/3 of the American public does not have a college degree. And looking at younger populations that are turning away from college, they're going to have to figure out a way to message to non-college educated individuals. But in addition to that, Republicans have an echo chamber that exists outside of mainstream media. They have a ton of podcasts. They have a ton of social media influencers and other people who are carrying their message. And Democrats are going to have to beef up their alternative media strategies as well to be able to match that apparatus. They're going to have to move outside of traditional spaces. And I think that they're definitely going to be looking towards doing that in the next few years.
Matt, President-elect Trump has said he's going to settle scores. He's not been afraid to say this. What can we expect from him? Do you think that's going to happen? And who's going to tell him no? At this point, who can tell him no?
I hope not, because I want to be able to have that kind of vision that we all got behind. One thing I'm interested in seeing, right? In 2016, that was a marriage of convenience. You had a lot of the RNC crew, Reince Priebus, and others kind of come in. It was a shotgun wedding. They've been dating for 10 years. Does somebody like a Marco Rubio, Doug Burgum, Bill Hagerty, folks who have been around, have their own names and their own brands, come into the cabinet, attach themselves. It does.
And they kind of know what they're signing up for this time.
Absolutely. There's no, illusion.
No one's going to be surprised.
Absolutely not. But they also have a heft. We'll see if it works, and we'll see if they sign on.
Do you think J.D. Vance is the heir apparent of the Republican Party right now?
I think right now, but who knows? It could be a long 4 years. But it's certainly, as we know, with Kamala Harris, it's hard to unseat a sitting vice president in a presidential primary. But I guess we'll find that out over the next 4 years.
It's interesting. Trump sort of said the quiet part out loud. He said people thought I had made a mistake in the beginning. I wasn't so sure. He says this yesterday during his speech, saying that he had won. And he said, but I'm very happy with him. He's so smart. How do you think Vance has played out so far for Republicans?
I am a big fan of J.D. Vance and have been. It was a shaky rollout, don't get me wrong. But he found his footing. I think the debate helped consolidate a lot of their mainstream establishment, skeptical Republicans around him. And also the ability to, as Misha said, go do those alternative podcasts, do hostile media. He was the king of the Sunday shows. I always went on with Kristen Walker. That, I think, really gave confidence to a lot of Republicans.
Amisha, who do you hope rises up in the Democratic Party?
There are several stars. We're talking about, Jasmine Crockett out of Texas. I would love to see Pete Buttigieg. I think that he's been a star since he came onto the scene. But in addition to that, I think that we're watching more women get involved and engaged. I would love to see Gretchen Whitmer. I think that this election cycle has shown us a few things, and I hope people don't take away the wrong thing. I don't want to believe, and I think that a lot of Americans don't, that a woman cannot have this leadership role as president of the United States. What I do think is that there's a lot of groundwork to be done. It's probably not going to be done in 107 days, and we have to ensure that we're getting out as many voters as possible and acknowledging all of the demographics that were that Obama coalition and making sure that it's not just his, but can be passed along to other Democratic candidates as well.
Yeah. Any women out there, Democrats who are women who you like, who you think are going to be leaders in this party?
Jasmine Crockett.
Oh, that's right. You said
Absolutely.
that first. Sorry. Someone got in my ear, but you did say that first. I want to ask you, if you guys don't win the House, are there any guardrails against President-elect Trump?
I think that that's a scary proposition. Without winning the House, we know that President-elect Trump has said multiple times that he is going to go out on this vengeance tour, essentially, getting back at people in media, attacking individuals in the justice system, basically, trying to annihilate our system of checks and balances as we know it. It would be a lot more difficult without winning the House. It would be a lot more difficult for Democrats or any, structure to hold this man accountable. And I think that that's probably one of the scariest places to be.
Amisha Cross, Matt Gorman, so great to have you guys on Top Story. Always a pleasure. Still ahead tonight, young male voters helped put former President Trump over the top. What changed this year compared to his past two campaigns? And did the chart-topping podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, play a significant role in getting that key demographic to the polls? The choices that candidates made when it came to media and how it changed. We're going to have a great conversation. Stay with us. Top Story, just getting started. We're back now with special coverage of the 2024 election. As we mentioned earlier, one key demographic that turned out for President-elect Trump was young men. Nationwide, men under 30 closed the gap between Democrats and Republicans in record numbers. You see it right here. The Trump campaign reaching that key demo in part by appearing on the #1 podcast in America, The Joe Rogan Experience, to make his pitch less than 2 weeks ago, praising the host. Let's listen.
I think you know everything, actually, as a student of yours. But
both President-elect Trump and Vice President Harris did appearances on popular podcasts in the final days of the campaign. Now the question is, did the support of the Joe Rogan Experience and other high-profile supporters like Barstool's Dave Portnoy help Trump secure his White House win? I want to bring in Joe Flint. He's a media reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I'm also told he goes by the moniker The Chosen One. Joe, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. We appreciate that. Joe, so first up, I mean, are we putting too much credit to the podcast? Or is the future already here, and it's a 3-hour interview show?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And I think the future is already here. It's been coming for the last few years. If we just look at the ratings last night for the cable news coverage, it was down, all of them, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, they were down from 2020. Now, 2020 was the pandemic, and a lot of us were a lot more inside, but nonetheless, people are gravitating towards other platforms. I myself was watching a lot of the free press on YouTube or Amazon. And to your point about podcasts, a lot of candidates chose to go the podcast route. They can get 3 hours on Joe Rogan, which gives them a long time to really reach out to an audience. And that audience is something that can be, multi-served. Like one listener can then send the link to Rogan's show to someone else. You can't really do that when someone goes on CNN.
I agree. I'll push back a little and say, and this is not taking away from Joe Rogan and everything he's built there, but Trump is not going to get interrogated like he would if he goes on Meet the Press, which he did, to his credit. The other side decided not to go on Meet the Press, but that's fine. They can make their own decisions. Are the podcasts making money? Because every time I read a story about podcasts, there's like 200,000 of them. How many are actually making money?
Probably of those 200,000, probably a few dozen. It is the amount of money that some of these hosts get. It's very extravagant. I mean, Joe Rogan, has a deal worth things like $250 million with Spotify. So how much revenue is there from subscribers and advertisers and advertising on YouTube? A lot. But most of these podcasts, I think it's still a business in its infancy, much like streaming, where there's a huge audience, but the companies that make the content are still trying to figure out how to turn that subscriber interest and listenership into real dollars.
Let's talk about some of the other sort of experiments that happened on election night. Our former colleague, Brian Williams, went out on his own with some of his friends and his colleagues to do a show on Amazon Prime. I was working the magic wall. I had no time to watch it. What was it like? Did you get a chance to sample it? Was it worth it?
I actually did sample it. I watched it a fair amount. I had it on my laptop, and then I was bouncing around on the TV to other channels. I mean, look, Brian Williams was in top Brian Williams form. He's still the guy at the end of the bar with witty quips after every comment. But I was surprised a little that Amazon, one of the most successful companies in the world, their set was sort of amateurish compared to what we saw on the CNNs and Fox Newses and MSNBCs in terms of their graphics and their presentation. There's kind of a green screen behind Brian where he's sort of in the middle of a road. Get it? He's in the middle of the road.
Yeah. So I saw that set. The set was, I got to be honest with you, and again, Brian Williams, one of the best to ever do this job. The set was a little off-putting. I do have to say that.
Yeah, I agreed. I found it off-putting as well. I'd almost just rather you were on a regular, old-fashioned meet the press type set and maybe put a little more into your maps and your charts.
So, Joe, here's the tough question, right? Because I think you're getting to my point here. There is this big debate about legacy media, which is places like NBC News and CNN and ABC News versus sort of, if you will, the podcast and social media and everything that's out there. But I think it's like comparing the Wall Street Journal, your newspaper, which to me is one of the premier papers in this world, to a Substack. Is there some great Substacks out there? There are, but you can't compare it to the power of the Wall Street Journal. Just like NBC News and comparing it to something else like a podcast, we have a decision desk. We are projecting calls. We have the exit poll data. We have experts that have been doing this for decades. I mean, I think it's almost an unfair comparison, even though we are losing audience. I'm not gonna deny that, but I think the debate is a little unfair. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it is. And even Amazon, I was a little surprised. Brian Williams would go to a clip of another news network. A couple times it was Fox News to show them projecting a state or when Trump won. And I thought, well, that's a nice plug for Fox News. And yes, the podcasts kind of get to, it might be a little bit of fun. They don't have the same,
parameters,
resources, of course, that the Journal has and that an NBC News has. And at the same time, they're not held to the same level of accountability that we are.
Yeah.
And candidates aren't as well, as you noted earlier.
Last question. Do you think candidates find these outlets and campaign using those outlets? And I'll give you a counterpoint. Governor DeSantis, when he was running the primaries, he refused to do any mainstream media. He was only doing conservative media. His poll number started to go down, and then he couldn't stop calling all the Sunday shows, calling all of our shows to get on. He was doing a ton of media. Kamala Harris took a similar path, right? She was only doing selective interviews. By the end, she changed, and she started doing much more interviews. But do you think politicians are going to kind of sort of, and it's happening a lot in the sports world as well, sort of avoid the legacy, the mainstream to try to get their own message out there, or maybe do softer interviews where they get some more time and not as hard-hitting questions?
I think it's a balancing act, and I think one of the challenges for Harris was she didn't really get her policies out there, her plans out there. She didn't do a good job of trying to separate herself from Biden. And those are the things you can really only do on a mainstream media in one of those tough environments in interviews versus the often friendly confines of a podcast.
Yeah, I think the lesson here is that in the media now, because it's so fractured, you have to be everywhere. And maybe if you're a candidate for office, you also have to be everywhere on all those forms of media. Joe Flint from the Great Wall Street Journal, look for his byline. We always appreciate you having on the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. When we come back, a look back at the moments that made the 2024 campaign. One for the record books, the biggest moments. Stay with us. Finally tonight, the 2024 campaign was one of the historic firsts, full of twists and turns that few saw coming. Here's a look back at some of the key moments from the last 2 years that will go down in history.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
That is 34 felony counts here, all guilty verdicts.
This is unprecedented for a former American president to be criminally convicted.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial.
I'm still the only person to ever beat Donald Trump. My memory is fine. If we finally beat Medicare.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
This night got off to a tough start for President Biden.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
The 45th president of the United States, injured but alive.
All of this unfolding with Republicans now gathering to officially nominate Donald Trump at their convention.
I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
News broke of different Democratic leaders calling for the president to step aside.
My fellow Americans, I revere this office, but I love my country more.
We choose freedom.
Is a fight for the future.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else.
The government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
Your vote is your voice, and your voice is your power.
We're now less than 2 hours away from the first polls closing.
It's 9:30 in the East. The vote counting coming in. Donald Trump at 214. Harris now with 145. So things certainly becoming a little more interesting as the evening progresses.
You get into the crowd here, it's particularly quiet in terms of their sense of optimism right now.
Optimistic atmosphere both here at West Palm Beach and at Mar-a-Lago.
We kept seeing the same thing. Underperform, underperform, underperform. Is that the story?
The story is he overperformed in the rural areas. She underperformed in the urban areas, in the big cities and the counties. She needed to win.
Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, the projected winner there, former President Trump. In Georgia, former President Trump, the projected winner there. North Carolina, Donald Trump, also the projected winner there. There's the map, Kate.
Yeah, there it is. A lot of red on that map. We are now projecting that the next president of the United States is Donald Trump.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve.
What an election, and the new era is just getting started. We thank you for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. Our special coverage of the 2024 election results continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.